The spring of 25 has sprung, 69 episodes in. We're on the hunt for young, dumb, and full of cum. Richie and John need a break from Trump's first 100 days. Time to get back to what matters, and that's naughty gays. We wanna play with pink holes, not talk about asses in red hats. Richie and John get tired of all the Nazi MAGA rats. It's our last get together till we come back on the 2nd of June. By then we hope he's gone and we can sing a different tune. Oh please God, please clean out the West Wing. The Trump stench is real and wears around America's collar like a ring. When we go on spring break, we wanna shit out the terror. No more living with 71 million American idiots era.
The Mutual Broadcasting System presents Richie and John, the podcast that connects you with the people, events, headlines, and lifestyle interests of the global LGBTQ+ community. Here's Richie Roy and John McMullen.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Richie and John. We are here with you on a momentous occasion. It is the 69th episode of Richie and John.
I can't think of a better theme for a substantial Saturday than a 69.
Right? I know. Perfect. So,
especially since we're both kind of orally inclined, doing
exactly.
a talk show and all.
We do like to give good oral, at least on podcasts.
Yeah.
So it's our 69th episode, and it is a substantial Saturday. We don't have a guest this time, but we have plenty to talk about, and there has been a lot going on. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. John, do you want to tell folks sort of what's happening in the near term for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Richie. We're going to take just a little break, and I promise we will be back, but we're going to take basically the month of May off to have an opportunity to retool some stuff. Namely, I'm moving studios as well in the Palm Springs area, and we're going to be moving into a much bigger facility, which is going to be super nice. And we will also be introducing some other podcasts and stuff when we come back, and I'm looking forward to that. But we thought, what better time than to do this during spring break, have a little spring cleaning, and at the same time, encourage you to maybe recharge your batteries. We've been going through an awful lot of muck together, and I think we could all use just a little break from the seemingly endless stream of bad news, or at least heartburn, that we've been getting from the likes of the administration and such. But we've got a lot of really, really good stuff planned for you as we get into the summer months and into the fall. And since a lot of people use the time of year to recharge and to go on spring break, we thought maybe that would be a good idea for us to do as well. So we'll talk in this episode also maybe about some getaway ideas for you. Some things that we'd like to encourage you to do or not do in light of some of the news and what's been going on, and also to talk a little bit about some of that muck and how others are successfully dealing with it. So a little bit of everything in this episode today. So we appreciate you being along with us this weekend.
Absolutely. And, one of the big stories that's happening, well, there's actually been a few really interesting things that have happened. We recently had, a member of Congress actually be brave enough to go to El Salvador and push the issue about this situation where this administration has illegally rendered someone by accident into a maximum security hellscape prison in a country run by a crackpot dictator. And the administration has basically said that they are not going to do anything about it. Court order be damned. And so we had a member of Congress go down, meet with the gentleman who was wrongfully imprisoned.
Yep. Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland went to meet with his constituent, Ábrego García, down in El Salvador. And at first they told him that they were not going to allow him to see him. It turned out that on Wednesday of this week, or was it Wednesday? No, Thursday of this week, that he was able to get some FaceTime with him. Oddly enough, it looked like it was in a restaurant environment where they were able to whisk him out of the prison to meet with him, yet they were not able to release him, as the United States Supreme Court has told the government that they do not have a right to not do, and to get his ass back into the United States ASAP, which, by the way, the government has also, through the courts, told the Trump administration to get every one of those inmates who were not entitled to any sort of due process back into the USA, and to give them due process. Doesn't mean that they're going to be set free. It just means that they are entitled to their day in court before anything else is done with them, like leave them in a foreign prison for the rest of their life.
Right. And so we're seeing a lot of action on this. I think that this is a story that people rightfully are really outraged about and are keeping the pressure on. This meeting was, I think, an important moment for this, to show that this is a human who, again, was, administration admitted it was a mistake. This is not. But the thing is now, but in the court filings, they admitted it was a mistake. In the court of public opinion, they are casting all kinds of aspersions. They are still saying MS-13 member, human trafficker, terrorist, all the kinds of stuff they are saying, in the court of public opinion, all not true. And even today, the White House, their social media on Twitter is run obviously by some kind of absolute troll that they picked up off of 4chan or under a bridge, because the New York Times had...
That would be that spokesperson that they have of some questionable brain power working for them, that terrible woman.
Wait, you mean Caroline Leavitt?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I don't know if she does the Twitter posts. I think it's some 19-year-old sociopath. It's just, but they had taken, the New York Times had basically done a headline talking about this situation and talked about, congressman went to El Salvador to meet Maryland man, and they kind of scratched things out, and they, with a fake red pen, and said, instead of Maryland man, it said MS-13 terrorist, and at the end of it wrote, and he's never coming back, which people noted is a very interesting strategy when the court has ordered you to do it. No. This is probably going to be an exhibit in a contempt filing.
Well, I can tell you this. On Thursday, I was very pleased, because I know that the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals is an extraordinarily conservative branch of our government. I have a friend who had a case, an appeal in front of them, and I flew to Florida to be there for that appeal years ago. And it was an excruciating experience to sit in that courtroom and listen to the arguments, and especially from the standpoint of what was coming from the dais that day. I will tell you that the judge who wrote the opinion in this matter that was released on Thursday this week was blistering towards the president in his ruling on this, and basically he didn't leave room for much guessing on anything as it might relate to future actions by this administration in terms of people who are quote unquote homegrowns and what might happen to others who disagree with this particular administration. And I think that we are about to find out just how deep and how hard those teeth are going to sink from the Supreme Court should there be any sort of effort to drive this further up the chain to the Supreme Court. I don't think that the judge who wrote this left any real room for them to do anything but to clobber the President of the United States and his ilk.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up a good point that, the Fourth Circuit is not the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit is famously kind of more progressive. But the Fourth Circuit is not that. But these are like small c conservatives. They I mean, at the end of the day, I may disagree with them about sort of their concepts about a lot of things, but fundamentally believe in the Constitution and the
With
basic
a big C.
Right. And they believe in the fundamental structure of how this country works and the protections that it affords everyone. And so it was really heartening, like you said, to see a very conservative circuit court hand this administration its ass on a platter and basically saying, this is slide towards, authoritarian regime that is contravening the basic fundamentals of how this country is meant to work.
I was also happy to see, and I forget which publication it was, but it was one of the magazines that, it wasn't the New Yorker, I don't think, but it was another one that writes a lot of really powerful stuff. And it was interesting to read something that they had published. I think it was also on maybe Thursday night that it was published, dealing directly with what and how they could sink their teeth into the administration in this criminal contempt proceeding. And in fact, they do have the right to take the president or others in the administration and have the marshal service put them in handcuffs and deliver them to the court and to a jail cell if necessary for their criminal contempt of Supreme Court orders.
Yeah. But the executive made a very wild filing that essentially said only the executive branch can enforce any laws. So the judiciary and the legislature have no power to enforce anything, which is basically saying we are the rule of law and you don't have any power to do anything in terms of the rule of law. I don't think courts are going to like that very much.
Yesterday, after reading this stuff or on Thursday, I have to say, tough luck, you're wrong. Yeah, go ahead and try it, because I think we're really getting down to the 0 hour in terms of seeing what exactly is going to happen. They pushed this to the line. Mm-hmm. I think we are within days and hours of finding out exactly who has what control.
I think that's right, and I think that with the illegal rendering of people to another country, to a prison without due process, I think the Supreme Court, they were very canny with what they did. They basically said you have to effectuate the return of this person, but kicked it to the lower court. And I think what they were doing there is because if the Supreme Court itself had said, we order that you bring this person back, that Trump would have probably said, fuck you. And I think what they're trying to do is, I think they're hoping, the Supreme Court is hoping that enough popular will builds to have no appetite for that when it does finally get to them, that there will be support when the administration does actually say to the Supreme Court, fuck you, because they will need people to speak out for what is essentially a complete abdication of the Constitution. That was an interesting move the Supreme Court made, but it will eventually get to them. They can't punt forever. They're going to finally someday have to actually decide whether they're going to enable autocracy in this country more than they already have, which they've done a fairly good job of. I mean, the immunity ruling was basically kind of a little bit of a carte blanche, but setting that aside, we'll see what they do. But the Fourth Circuit, you're right, I think gave them a lot to chew on for when it inevitably gets back to them.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting spring and summer. That is for sure.
Yeah. And another thing that has sort of popped up recently in terms of institutional pushback is we saw what I think is the administration vastly overplaying its hand with a very particular target that is particularly poised to weather a lot of storms. And that would be a school that is older than this country, And that is Harvard. They have I think it's a $53 billion endowment. You know, they've been around forever. They have a lot of firepower, and they also have a lot of PR behind them. They are a machine when it comes to PR. And the Trump administration basically sort of tried to do what they did with Columbia, but on steroids. They basically said, you know, we're going to freeze all your federal funding unless you give us, you know, complete control, you know, auditors over courses and faculty and, you know, no face masks and this and that. And they gave a laundry list of demands. And Harvard said, we can't do that. Like, that flies in the face of the First Amendment, of academic freedom, of what we stand for. So pound sand. And
by the way, we're the home of some of the most brilliant legal minds in this country's history. So come at us.
And you know, I think that and I think what that did is that also galvanized a lot of other institutions, because especially after, you know, Columbia rolled over and we saw what happened there, which is Columbia capitulated. And like they, of course, do, the administration did not stop there. That was their opening gambit, and they continued to ask for more. And so Columbia has been put in a really tough spot, but Harvard out of the gate basically was like, no. And then other schools now are saying, you know, we're going to take the same approach.
Yeah. There's a lot of universities around the country who in the last week have, with other schools, made these pacts that they are going to work. They're calling it the Mutual Something Pact, where they are working to Mutual Defense Pact, and they're working together to put all of their legal might behind defending their separation from this administration's desires for all these educational institutions, which is great. I'd like to share for just a moment. The other night they shared on television some brand new numbers from a couple of different polls in the country, really big polls. And right now, Mr. Trump's approval rating is 47%. His disapprove is 51%, which is really kind of unheard of at this stage in the game for a new administration to be that far underwater. And I think that that's a really important point to take to heart. His handling of the federal government workforce, 53% disapprove, 44% approve of that. In terms of his handling on tariffs, 57% of the American people disapprove, 41% approve. In terms of his handling of foreign policy, which is one of those areas that he has always kind of had the upper hand in, 53% of Americans disapprove, 42% of America approves of his job in that regard. Probably if there was one thing that people focused on in terms of that helped him win this last election, it was who they thought would do a better job in terms of dealing with inflation. And he really is underwater on this one. Right now, his handling of inflation, 60% of America disapproves of him, 37% approve of the job that he's doing in that regard. And in terms of his overall approval rating, again, 52% to 42% disapproving versus approving. He is in deep, deep shit. And there's a lot of independents and conservatives who are in the mix on these poll numbers. So even if he could get, and he can't, there's no way that we would have a majority of the states that would ratify change to our Constitution. He wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell today of getting elected for a third term.
I'm not, you know what? I'm not even going to I'm not even going to talk about that as like the fact that they are trying to move the goalposts to that degree. I mean, that is Gulf of America level gaslighting. I mean, it's just so stupid. But to your point, about the polls, and you see also anecdotally on social media, more and more Trump voters. There was one story about a Trump voter who is coming back from visiting family. I believe it was in Canada or going to Canada, got detained at the border for 10 hours. This is a citizen, a naturalized citizen, and they basically didn't give him any information, harassed him, told him this is how it is now, in Trump's America. And eventually he finally got out, and he was saying I believe it was to NBC Boston, I thought that under him things would be better, but they're worse. So we're seeing anecdotally people who voted for him being frustrated. But I guess my question is that reality? Are these polls, is this dissatisfaction, is this reaching his office? I think he has so surrounded himself by sycophants and people who don't feed him real information about anything that I don't think he has a clue about that. I mean, in the same way that I don't think that he, before announcing his toddler tariffs, is like baby's first economic policy level decrees, I don't think anyone said to him like, you know what, China holds the cards here, actually.
Yeah.
They have the rare earth minerals. They have the chip factories. They have everything. I think he truly believed, because of the people who he surrounds himself with, that America first, America best, that we had all of the leverage. And so I wonder if this growing discontent for this administration, I don't know if he knows that is happening.
I agree with you. I can't argue that one bit, because, even if he did, I don't think that his own brain power would allow it to break through. I think he lives in such a state of mental retardation. I just don't think it can get through his head that he does anything wrong, or that his perception of what's going on in the world is anything other than he wants to believe that it is. Fortunately, that is not the case. And fortunately, another thing that we've seen in the last couple of weeks with this tour that AOC and Bernie Sanders have done in all these different communities, many of them very conservative, including this past week going to the very rich progressive state of Montana, going out to Big Sky Country, where they brought together tens of thousands of roaring, cheering people who are not in the president's corner, at least anymore, if they were ever. I got to tell you, to use his language, it's a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I am heartened to see that if people didn't know before, they know now that what we were talking about for many months prior to going to the ballots last November is the way that it is with them. And that Project 2025 was very much a real thing, that strategy was a real thing that they really, really worked on for years while they weren't in office. And, I mean, there's certainly still a lot of people. I think I heard one poll the other day that indicated that there is like 36% of people who identify as being a mega Republican. That they are hook, line, and sinker, have bought in to the mega movement. And that doesn't surprise me. But, there's also a huge number of people in the United States of America who unfortunately just don't vote. And that's a shame. I think we should do it the way that they do it in Australia. I think that there should be a financial incentive to vote or disincentive to not vote. Where it's not like a huge fine, but it's a fine and it's more of an annoyance than not going to the polls.
Right. which, will never happen here because, when we look at things like the SAVE Act, they're trying to disenfranchise voters. They don't want anyone to vote.
I know.
Really. But, I think that, you talked about Bernie and AOC, and I think that there's this kind of, I think right now, there's a little bit of a kind of inflection point because what we're seeing is those rallies that they're having are very successful, and it's showing that people are dissatisfied. It's also showing bravery because, this administration has shown itself to be very thin-skinned. We saw a really, I think, chilling but very amazing admission from Lisa Murkowski, who talked this week and said candidly that we are all, she's, a legislator. We are all afraid of him and his retribution. And you look and you see things like, just this week, whether it's a school like Columbia or Harvard, or someone like an elected official like Tish James in New York, where, they have announced, bogus Pam Bondi, who is an absolute, Gestapo member, just totally in the tank for this, authoritarian regime. Basically has announced that they are, looking into, mortgage fraud or something from, for Tish James. Yeah. And it's clearly only because Tish James has been sticking it to them from a very powerful state that also, is very blue and is supportive of pushing back on this administration. And so, I think every time we see someone, whether it's a Tish James, an AOC, a Bernie, whoever it is out there loudly talking about the fact that this administration is not only feckless, but is destructive and is important. And I think we're going to see more of it. The more people that do it, the more people will feel emboldened to do it. It's kind of, we're at a moment where I think, whether it's the Harvard moment or the flying to El Salvador moment, but we're starting to see, people finally taking concrete actions to bring the case that this administration is detrimental to an anathema to this country's basic structures.
Yeah. Well, I also, see that there is a movement among judges in this country who are getting pizzas delivered to their homes as a sign of intimidation because people are trying to make it clear that we know where you live, Your Honor. Mm-hmm. And that is going over like a fart in church. And, there's going to be a breaking point. And then we're going to see what's really going to happen. And while the military has a responsibility to take orders from the commander-in-chief, they also have a responsibility not to take illegal orders from the commander-in-chief. And I think that's what we're going to see, where the rubber is going to meet the road. And God help us when it does, but, God help us when it does.
Yeah. No, exactly. And, I think there's just been so much going on that it is good to protect a little bit of sanity. And part of that could be making some plans when the weather finally, if ever, gets nice.
Oh, it's not nice where you are. It's 71 and sunny here.
Okay, Palm Springs, whatever. But when the weather does finally get nice, broadly, maybe not just in Palm Springs, of taking some trips, doing some fun stuff this summer. And of course, when it comes to this show, that also happens to coincide with things like Pride season. So yeah, it is that time of year when people start thinking about where they're going to go. And
I think there's lots of great places people can go that are also very gay friendly, gay supportive. Mm-hmm. And some of those places beyond here, just in Palm Springs, California, which is very gay, are places like Provincetown, Massachusetts. A lot of people love to go there, and they're just coming into their season. Also to places like Puerto Vallarta, where our friends, Jordan Starr and company, are going to be doing their big ICCA awards in May. Maybe a nice little spring break spot for you to run off to and enjoy some sunshine and get ready for the summer months. Mm-hmm. There's also places that are very LGBTQ supportive, like Hawaii and San Francisco and Seattle, that are on the West Coast and are in safe states. places where your safety is not necessarily guaranteed, but you're not going to have to worry about the Gestapo picking you up on the streets of Florida or South Carolina or, other places in the Midwest that may be a little less friendly to us, and especially if you don't have the right hue of skin color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're starting to see that a lot too, where people are getting pulled over simply, because of the color of their skin. And that is really a scary thing right now.
Yeah, we are. We're seeing that, and we're seeing it in different ways and places. We're also seeing there was reporting of also, and I forget where it happened, militias basically roving around, harassing people of color and acting as if they are under authority of the government or the police or whatever. There was a video of these militia members bashing in the windows of some brown people's car, strictly, obviously, because of the color of their skin and where they happen to be.
And they're feeling emboldened to do that in part because they're seeing people who are officially with law enforcement agencies in the United States of America who are also doing that to people who are American-born citizens. It's disgusting.
Yes. It really is just, and I almost kind of wonder, it would be a very long list, I guess, but it would be nice if someone kind of kept a website with, names of people that basically is just kind of going to be 5 or 3 or 10 or 20 years from now, the Nuremberg trial list of people, the Caroline Levitts, the Tom Homans, the Pete Hegseths. But going on down the line, the enablers, small and large, the enablers of this kind of widespread, again, kind of authoritarian, racist, sexist, xenophobic administration. I think that we saw in the first Trump administration, he kind of ceded a lot of fertile ground, and over time those roots have taken hold. And and then when we saw the January 6th pardons, there are a lot of empowered sociopaths who now just feel like they can act with impunity, whether they have a badge on their shirt or are just freelancing.
Right. Yeah, I really hope that folks, if you're thinking about doing any sort of travel outside of the United States this year, especially in this climate, that you will reconsider leaving the shores of the United States, just because getting back in, no matter what you think and no matter what documents you have, if they have you on any sort of a watch list, or they somehow think that you have them sending innocent people to a third world country, essentially, and being locked up in prisons who are naturalized citizens of the United States, and they don't care. If they sense that you are not with them, you're against them, you may have a very hard time getting back into the country. I have a friend right now who was very much on the conservative side of things, but he's been traveling for the last month in Italy, and he's actually headed home in a couple of days to the Bay Area in California. And he's concerned. And, and his attitudes, not that he ever thought much of the Trump administration, even the first go round, but he definitely is very sensitive to what's going on with this move towards fascism in the United States, and does not trust these people. He is even safe to get back into his home country right now, and he's as white as driven snow.
And, there's been a lot of guidance, from whether you're domestic, a U.S. citizen or otherwise, that if you are traveling, and especially if you're traveling internationally, and this is for U.S. citizens, that they're recommending things like bringing a burner phone, wiping your laptop, because at the border, CBP does have the authority to check anyone's electronic devices, whether you're a citizen or not. TSA does not have that. They can't actually go into your phone, but CBP at the international border can. And they anecdotally, again, they are getting people to unlock their phones and are going through the phones and looking for things. And whether or not they actually are allowed to, which they are allowed to go into the phone. Whether or not, some posts on social media against the administration should be grounds to harass you, they can certainly harass you. If you're a U.S. citizen, they can't deny you access to your own country, but they can make it a hellish situation to get there. They can make you wait. They can interrogate you. They can do whatever they want. And so we're seeing a situation that previously would be for things like going to North Korea or China or Russia, where they're saying, don't bring your real phone, bring a burner phone, wipe your laptop so it's just blank. And when you come in, that way you're not going to have any chance of getting caught in the web, which is insane. But
it is
that's
insane.
Where we're at.
Yeah. I don't even know what to say anymore about this, because it's just something that we've not been used to in our lifetime. For most of us. Some of us, yes, because there are some who are in our 70s and 80s and 90s probably here in this country who remember the Cold War and various things that happened during that era, but who have not previously had to really worry about these kinds of things. I remember in 1998 when I went to Amsterdam for the Gay Games, and I had a very unpleasant experience with the United States Customs and Border Patrol leaving the country and taking certain things with me to go over and do work at the Gay Games. And I hated our country for about 3 months dealing with that situation. And that was nothing compared to what we're dealing with right now. Nothing. And so I know that they are capable of doing things that will make your life absolutely miserable. And we don't want to see that happen if you are going to go somewhere this spring and enjoy yourself. We want you to be able to get out of town and to enjoy yourself and to let your hair down and not have to think about all these things that might have you worried. So I would go to the International Gay Lesbian Travel Association, the IGLTA, and their website, and look at member companies that they have on there that they endorse and do business with domestically and internationally, to make sure that you're dealing with people who will also be able to give you advice on places that you'll be traveling to and where to be, in fact, the most safest. And if by any measure you are going overseas or, out of the United States of America this spring, please reach out to the embassy in wherever you're going and make sure that you have the name and contact information for somebody that you may have to turn to for help should you need it.
Well, and that brings up actually another really important point, is that right now, in terms of travel, it's a moment where some people have a higher risk tolerance than others, and they're like, what, I'm traveling by myself. I'm not traveling with my partner, so they don't know I'm gay. I'll just travel. I'll have a great time going somewhere adventurous, and it'll be fun. Unfortunately, though, at this moment, you bring up things like embassies. They are actively talking about slashing the State Department's budget by half, and they are already closing embassies and consulates around the world. And so there is a chance that you can't do that best practice.
Well, that should be your first clue. Don't go there.
Mm-hmm. So, it is a moving target. I think in the short term, it's like, be pretty careful with your summer travel plans. Maybe take that Alaskan cruise instead of, going to
see the glaciers before they finally melted completely.
Right, exactly. Right. But, in any case, I think there's a lot to be worried about. But as we've talked about, there are some glimmers of hope. There's some moments of courage happening. And I think we're going to see more of them. I really do.
Richie, I went earlier this week to a member of Congress's district town hall meeting. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, it was a really positive experience. It was not one of those ones who was getting yelled at because it was, well, first of all, it was a district that was a Democrat serving. And secondly, he really had lots of good answers for the people who were concerned about so many different issues that are facing American people right now. But, he made a point of something. He told the crowd this week that anybody who has actually handwritten a letter to him, that he feels he owes it to them to write a handwritten letter back to them. It's not something that's just, typed up by a staffer and sent off as a form letter. And I thought, wow, that's really a refreshing thing to hear. And while that's not going to be the way that every member of Congress deals with communication in an office, that even in his office, he says that they deal with about 1,000 letters a week right now. And I think it's really important that these people who are fighting for us, even if they're not your elected official, but they're in other parts of the country and they're standing up and they're doing the right thing, I think it's really important that we maybe take a little time as we take some break. And if you want to focus on something really positive to do that will be good for your soul and help kind of reinvigorate them in their defense of the things that matter to us, to drop them a note and to tell them, whether it's an AOC or a Bernie Sanders, or it's a lesser known entity on the House floor, to let them know that you appreciate what they're doing to preserve our democracy. And that while you may not live in a district that they serve, that what you see and hear about that they're doing in that regard is important to you, and that you look forward to being able to support their campaign in one way or another, even if it's not in a financial sense, and to also encourage people who maybe live in districts that they live in to do the same. I just, gratitude has a way of multiplying and coming back in some really positive manner. And I know that I felt good after going to that meeting earlier this week, a lot better than I felt in a long time. Dealing with so much of this muck, because there's none of us who aren't tired of this, who aren't depressed by hearing all of the bad news that's going on in the world today. Just because Richie and I sit here and talk with you about it doesn't mean that, we love it. We don't love it. We would love to not have to talk about any of this and to be able to focus on fun things like talking about, what you should be doing to celebrate your 69th episode. Mm-hmm. But, I think it's really, 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 really important to give kudos to those people who are trying to make our life a lot less awful.
I totally agree with you. And I think that also it brings up a really good point. We'll see, these Republican Congress members and senators seem so chicken shit. I don't know what they would do about anything. But I will say that to the extent anything will cut through, I think right now the old-fashioned methods actually mean something. Even if it's not handwritten, even typed up, a mailed letter. Because when I was in junior high and high school, I was an intern at the state capitol. And one of my jobs was to take the stack of mail that came in and open up every envelope and unfold the paper and at least look at them and sort of triage or whatever and get them ready for response. So sending through the mail, going physically to an office or a field office or a town hall, these kind of retail physical things mean a lot more because, again, emails can be spammed. They can be chat GPT'd. They're to wash. And also they can be dealt with through software, that looks at keywords and just fires off an automatic response. No human has ever looked at that email, and it means nothing to anyone,
I think it's also important to remember, too, along that line, that if you are running into problems right now because of all the government layoffs and, people have been dismissed from their jobs. And let's say you're dependent on Social Security or disability or on veterans benefits and you're not getting them. These people that's what the majority of people who work in their offices deal with, those things. They actually are your liaison for dealing with those kinds of problems. And that's one of the things that my congressman was talking about the other night, that, they have dealt with innumerous problems and helped get people back on benefits who somehow were taken off or were told, oh, you're dead now, or, whatever. Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of things that their offices really deal with day in and day out. So if you're wondering, what do I get for my money? That's a pretty big thing. And especially if you're dependent on some government program that helps you just to simply survive day to day. Don't negate utilizing those resources that are still there while we've got them anyway.
Yeah. And so it's reach out to, again, your congressperson, your senator. The other thing too, there are a couple other things that come to mind. One is, we've talked on this show a lot about the importance of local media. Specifically, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not that they're bad. I mean, although Washington Post is, now a Bezos mouthpiece, New York Times has been fairly defanged. But in any case, local media does still exist. And it covers things that matter in your neck of the woods. And also you can get in touch with them. So if you're a veteran and your benefits have been cut, talk to the local newspaper. Write to them too, because maybe that's a story that gets picked up, and maybe that story then gets other people to write in, and that gets to your local congressperson. That's another resource. And then the other one that I'd also say, especially if you're in a blue, specifically if you're in a blue state too, is a lot of times the attorney general of your state. Those offices are very powerful and have a lot of support for a lot of different things. And so that's another place too, in these moments, if you're in a blue state, pay attention to what your attorney general is doing too.
Yeah. And if you're in a red state and you're running into problems and they're not doing their job as you know that they should be doing, that's when you need to reach out to organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union and let them know what's going on in your state, in your region. They have various regions all throughout the United States, in every state in the country. And so if you're not getting the kind of attention from office like an AG's office, that's a good place to go as well, because they can hold them accountable to answering to you.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, lots of avenues. We're going to have to, again, it's sort of a use every mechanism that you can kind of moment, and this is going to be for the foreseeable future for lots of different things. Just this week, there's news that the FDA is looking into stopping monitoring food safety at a federal level, which means that that's going to be up to states. So, again, we used to kind of have an idea that you could go to the store and buy safe food because the FDA cared about that and was monitoring it. And that's not going to be the case anymore. It's up to states. So,
if you live in Arkansas and you're depending on that terrible former spokesperson for the current president as your governor to keep your pigs safe when you're making bacon. I don't know. I think I'd probably stop eating bacon if I lived in Arkansas right now for a while.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've got a lot of stuff that I know we're going to miss talking about for the next month or so, but it's all going to be worth it because we're going to do some updating and moving and painting the walls. And when we come back, we will have just as much fun and raise just as much hell, if not more so. So I hope that you will be with us when we get back. And also, please let your friends know this is a good time that they could go and subscribe to our podcast so that they know when we're back, because it will automatically download to their podcast players or to their YouTube account. It will notify them as soon as we're back. And we appreciate all your help in helping us spread the word. And thank you for being here for our first 69 episodes of Richie and John. And, I think we might have a few surprises also about events that you're going to get an opportunity to interact with us from the summer on through and into the winter this year, still yet to come. So, Richie, I hope you have a nice break. And I know I'm going to be working, but I'm also going to enjoy taking a little break from having to spew off about all of this nastiness for a while as well.
Yep. Well, we'll see you all when we get back. But in the meantime, have a good one, and we will be back soon.
June 2nd.
Thank you for joining us on Richie and John. This podcast is a production of the Mutual Broadcasting System and is available at richieandjohn.com, as well as most major podcast portals, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify.